So my next step is to go back and take a look at my marker test sheet and look at the colored pencil overshading that I did on here. And then I want to kind of consider how that could relate to what I've done on my deck. So when I look at the colors that I used white on top of the violet. I used the 942, which is the goldenrod, on top of the yellow. But I also have that medium brown color in there. So I might not go ahead and use this on the yellow because it's so close to that. So decisions that I made on here can change by the time I get to here. I think instead of using the white on the violet, I might actually use a darker color, and this is indigo blue. All right, PC 901. With that, I'm going to try to shade this violet triangular area that I contained that space in from the outside to highlight to outside. So I want the middle of this triangular shape to appear to be lighter. So I'm just going to use my colored pencil up against the edge here, nice and clean, and I'm going to create a little bit of a gradient. So the outside edge here, just like we did before, creating that subtle fade, and you can see it just makes a little bit of a referenced shaded version of that violet using the indigo blue. Indigo blue is kind of like a navy blue, so it's similar to the violet color, and you can see it kind of creates that implied shadow, and maybe soften it just a little bit more to the highlight right in the middle there. All right, so continue that process on the other figures as well. So I'm going to do the same thing to this triangle, and then here when I get to this point, obviously I need to fade it to the middle. So start working on some colored pencil techniques to add overall depth to the characters, creating implied shadows, as well as there's going to be some areas in here that we could use a pencil shading to create some depth and shadow in those Zentangle designs. So here I'm using that indigo blue, and I'm trying to create a little bit of a cast shadow on the background and on any of the objects that are behind it. Instead of using black, I'm just putting in a little bit of an implied cast shadow in the same area as the object. So I'm right up against the black, and I'm fading it out just a little bit, creating an implied cast shadow of those characters. And again, I'm not using black, I'm using the indigo blue, so it's a more subtle shadow. Lessen the pressure, and then transition it across. So I'm using this as a light source coming from this side. So all of these characters have the light left, top right here coming across. So all the shadows are going to be on this edge of the objects, overlapping the background color, which is that tan. Now I'm not going to do it over top of those areas. I'm not going to put the drop shadow in over top of those areas with color pencil. I'm going to do it with regular pencil and a blending tortillon, and I'll show you that in a minute. But again, I've got the graphite areas in those. Now I'm going to do it with this, again, all the cast shadows are going to be up against each of the overlapping forms. And that gives them to me on the same side as well. So the purple shape there creates that implied cast shadow at the bottom of the foot here. Alright, so now that I've created some depth with my colored pencil, now I want to consider that same concept with the cast shadow inside these areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to use just a pencil shading in here. I'm going to use my pencil and I'm going to use just some scribbling on the outside edge. And then I'm going to use my blending tortilla in here and I'm going to pick this up just like a brush and a paintbrush. This is just a spun up piece of paper. So now I'm going to go in here with that graphite and I can add a shade, an implied cast shadow right there on that triangular edge. And it creates the implied cast shadow there. I'm going to also do that on this edge. So if I need more, I can just pick up more graphite, and then come in and create that implied cast shadow on the areas of white. I could also do it with some of the, the underneath edges on these. Could put a little bit to an implied cast shadow on those objects too. And if I need to get a little bit more in there to make it a little bit more visible, I can just come right in with my pencil on the side here and I can kind of fill in those areas with a nice soft value. So it's not too scribbly. I don't want to do this. I want to use the side of the pencil to get a smooth flat tone there if just picking it up with the blending tortillon isn't enough. And you can see what happens when I put that in. Then I can just directly blend right on top and it creates that implied shadow. So that just gave my overall project a lot more depth with the overlapping of all the shapes now and made it much more successful visually.